I'm Natasha, and this is the Vinyl Vault. Tonight, we're not doing the fairy tale version. We're doing the timeline, the gatekeepers, the access pathway nobody wants to explain. Because the myth says love at first sight in Germany. But the reality is a question that gets harder the more facts you add. How does a teenage girl end up in the private orbit of the most famous man on the planet? And why does everyone around him help it happen? We're going to walk through the dates, the ages, the people who opened doors, the wedding that was stage managed like a military operation, and the moment years later when Priscilla Presley said 5 words that quietly kill the romance frame, "There were too many of us." By the end, you'll understand why this isn't a romance story. It's a power story. Here's the version you've been sold. Elvis and Priscilla meet in Germany in 1959. He's serving his country. She's the stepdaughter of an Air Force officer. It's fate. It's beautiful. He's smitten. She's mature for her age. They wait. They marry. American royalty. That's the version that got repeated for decades. Here's what the timeline shows. Bad Nauheim, West Germany. September 1959. Elvis Presley is 24 years old, stationed in Germany during his military service. He's still the biggest star in the world. The army just relocated the machine. He's living off base in a rented house with his father, his grandmother, and a rotating cast of friends and hangers-on. The Memphis entourage followed him across the Atlantic. Priscilla Beaulieu is 14. She's a 9th grader. She's been in Germany only a few weeks. She's shy, she's homesick, she misses Texas. And then someone offers to introduce her to Elvis Presley. That someone is a serviceman named Curry Grant, connected to Elvis's inner circle. He approaches Priscilla at the enlisted club on base. He tells her he knows Elvis. He tells her Elvis would love to meet her. He offers to bring her to the house. And I want you to pause on that for a second, because this is the question the fairy tale version skips over like it's nothing. Why is a grown man recruiting a 14-year-old girl to bring to a 24-year-old celebrity's private home? That's not destiny. That's logistics, she goes. Her parents give permission because it's Elvis, because Curry reassures them, because they're told there will be other people there. It's framed as safe, supervised, an honor. The house is full when she arrives. Friends, other soldiers, music. It's loud and warm and completely surreal for a kid who's barely been in Germany long enough to unpack. Elvis is in uniform. He's polite. He plays piano. He talks to her about music, about missing home, about how hard it is to be far from everything familiar, and she's wearing a navy and white sailor dress. Keep that picture in your head, because that image becomes the anchor point for everything that follows. It's the detail that gets romanticized in every retelling. The shy girl, the humble superstar, the instant connection, but let's add the facts that don't fit the romance frame. She's 14. He's 24. He's one of the most famous men alive. She's a military dependent in a foreign country, socially isolated, desperate to belong. And after that first night, the invitations don't stop. Not once, not twice, again and again. By her own later accounts, members of Elvis's circle pick her up from her parents' home and drive her to the house. She's told she'll be home by a certain hour. She's told there will be supervision. And technically, there are other people around, members of the entourage, friends, hangers-on. But supervision for who? Because what it really means is this. She's spending long evenings inside the private home of a man 10 years older who controls every room he's in. Her parents allow it. And this is where the machinery of access becomes visible. Because the parents aren't stupid. They're trusting a system of reassurance that's been carefully built. Elvis's father is there. The house is framed as respectable. Curry and others vouch for the setup. And critically, Elvis is Elvis, the all-American boy, the polite soldier, the son who loves his mama. The image is so airtight that questioning it feels almost paranoid. That's how celebrity works. The brand does the reassuring for you. So the visits continue. Through the fall of 1959 into early 1960. She's sitting with him while he plays piano. She's listening to him talk, his fears, his frustrations, his homesickness, and little by little, she's being shaped into his comfort, his confessor, his audience of one, and then he leaves. March 1960. Elvis finishes his military service and returns to the United States. The press covers his homecoming like a national event. He's back to recording, back to filming, back to being Elvis Presley the product. Priscilla is still in Germany. She's 15. She's back to being a high school student on a military base in a foreign country. The story, by all logic, should end there. It doesn't, because the tether holds phone calls, letters, packages. According to Priscilla's later accounts, Elvis stays in contact. Maybe not every day because the machine is loud and hungry, but enough. Enough to keep her in his orbit. Enough to make her feel chosen. Enough to keep her waiting. And if you've ever been a teenager with a crush, you already know what that does to your brain. Now multiply it by 1,000, because this isn't a boy you like. This is the most magnetic person on the planet telling you you matter. You get pulled into something unreal, then you're sent back to school where the hallway feels fake, your friends feel fake, normal life feels small. For about 2 years, that's the dynamic. She's in Germany, he's in Memphis, Hollywood, moving through a career that never really stops, but the connection is maintained, carefully, consistently, just enough to keep the story alive. And then in 1962, the ask comes. Elvis wants her to come to Memphis, to live at Graceland, to finish high school there, near him. She's 17. Still a minor, still living under her parents' authority. And somehow, this plan is presented to her parents not as a risk, but as an opportunity. Here's what the gatekeepers deliver. Promises of supervision, assurances that she'll stay with Elvis's father and stepmother, commitments that she'll finish school, guarantees that everything is respectable and appropriate. Elvis makes calls. His father backs him up. The machinery of trust clicks into place again, and her parents say yes. March 1963, Priscilla Beaulieu boards a plane to Memphis, Tennessee. She's 17 years old. She moves into Graceland. Let's be very clear about what Graceland is. It's not just a house, it's Elvis's kingdom. It's where he controls the variables, who enters, who speaks, who stays, who disappears. It's staffed by employees who answer to him. It's populated by an entourage that depends on him. It's a closed world. And she has just entered it as a teenager with no power, no money, no independence, and no real exit ramp. On paper, it looks proper. She enrolls in an all-girls Catholic school to finish her senior year. In practice, she's living in the home of a man who can shape the atmosphere around her with a single sentence. According to her own memoir and later interviews, Elvis had very specific ideas about her appearance: hair, makeup, clothes, a certain style, and it's always framed as care, mentorship, taste, him helping her become the woman she's meant to be. But there's another word for that: molding. And I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying it because language matters. When one person holds all the power, fame, money, access, the gatekeepers, the household, the rules, and the other person is young, isolated, dependent. Mentorship can start to look a lot like control. So she adapts, she performs the role. Meanwhile, Elvis is still Elvis. He's filming movies, he's recording. He's surrounded by women, co-stars, fans, women brought into the orbit by the entourage. Priscilla is there, but she's not the only presence in the ecosystem. And that's an important distinction, because being chosen doesn't always mean being protected. Sometimes it just means being positioned. Publicly, none of this is visible. The press doesn't know the details of her life inside Graceland. The relationship isn't handled like a normal relationship. Elvis's team is careful, because Elvis in the early 60s is being rebranded. The army cleaned him up. Hollywood is making him safe. Marriage to the right girl would complete the picture, but not yet. The timing has to be right. So Priscilla waits. She graduates high school in 1963. She's 18, legally an adult, but still completely inside his world, still shaped by his preferences, still living in a house where he makes the rules. The years tick by. 1, 2, she's in her early 20s now, and still no public acknowledgement. No clear plan, no stable ground that belongs to her, just the closed loop of Graceland and the unspoken understanding that she's his in private. According to later interviews and her memoir, this is when the cracks widen. The infidelity isn't subtle anymore. She knows about other women, and she's living with a quiet, brutal realization. You can be molded into the perfect image and still not be enough to hold someone who's never learned limits. And then, suddenly, the wedding is announced. May 1st, 1967, Las Vegas, the Aladdin Hotel. The ceremony is tiny, short, private. Priscilla's parents are there. Elvis's father is there. A few members of the inner circle. The press is locked out. Everything is controlled, timed, stage managed, and then, almost immediately after the vows, they walk out and face the cameras. There's a press moment, photos, smiles, Elvis in a tuxedo, Priscilla in a white dress, the hair perfected, bouquet in hand, private vows, public performance. The image is perfect. They fly to Palm Springs for a brief honeymoon. Then Elvis goes back to work. And just like that, the myth is complete. The king has his queen. America is satisfied. But here's what Priscilla says later in interviews after the divorce, when the fairy tale energy has faded and the reality has had time to settle. There were too many women, too many of us. Not I was naive, not he wasn't ready. Too many of us. That phrase does something brutal to the romance frame. Because it's not jealousy, it's accounting. It's the quiet admission that she wasn't the singular love story the public imagined. She was one figure in a crowd, a role shaped to fit a narrative, maintained as long as the image required, and left to deal with the gap between what she was promised and what she actually lived. They have one child, Lisa Marie, born in 1968. For a while, that holds things together, or at least holds the image together. But by the early 70s, Priscilla is done. She spent more than a decade inside his orbit. She was 14 when it started. Now she's in her mid-20s, finally asking what her life looks like outside of him. She leaves Graceland in 1972. The divorce is finalized in 1973. She's 27 years old. Elvis dies in 1977, and after his death, the story calcifies into legend, the romance, the devotion, the king and his queen. For years, that's the version that gets repeated. Documentaries, specials, commemorative packages that smooth everything into nostalgia. But Priscilla keeps talking, in interviews, in her memoir, on camera, and every time she speaks, she adds details that complicate the myth, the age, the control, the isolation, the other women, the exhaustion of being the image and still not being enough. She's never stood on a stage and labeled it for you. She hasn't needed to. Because if you listen to the shape of what she describes, an adult with global power, a teenager with none, a network of enablers facilitating access, a closed environment where she's shaped, and a public narrative that reframes it all as romance, a lot of people hear that and start asking the same uncomfortable question. So let's go back to the first night. Bad Nauheim, 1959. The navy and white sailor dress. A 14-year-old girl being driven to the home of a 24-year-old superstar. The fairy tale version says, love at first sight. The timeline version asks, who made that night possible? Who kept making it possible? And why did nobody with power ever say out loud, stop? Because this isn't only a story about two people. It's a story about the machinery around fame, the gatekeepers who open doors, the parents who trust the image, the entourage who facilitate access, the press that prints the fairy tale because it sells, the management that stage manages the wedding, the culture that romanticizes imbalance and calls it destiny. Priscilla survived it. She built a life after Elvis. She became a businesswoman. She protected his legacy while also slowly telling more of her truth. But surviving doesn't mean it wasn't damaging. And legacy doesn't erase how it started. The myth is still out there. You'll still see the photos, the anniversaries, the packages that celebrate the romance. But now you know the timeline, the dates, the ages, the access pathway, the gatekeepers, the too many of us. That's the story they downplay. If this episode made you see the legend differently, subscribe. This is what we do here, one myth at a time, pulled apart gently but honestly. I'm Natasha. Thanks for listening.